Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker-Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Audiobook Connection. I have with me today Scott Ellis. He is one of our awesome narrators that we have worked with on many different audiobook projects, and we're going to get a peek behind the scenes from the narrator perspective. Scott, welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to talk with you and your listeners, and looking forward to this.
Great. And I should have said, you're not just a narrator, also an audio engineer. So we'll probably dive into a little bit of that territory as well and how those are very much a partnership. But so, as I say, for our listeners, you've narrated several projects for us, have been with us several years now, and I'd love to hear about how you actually got started in the audiobook industry. Which direction did you come in from, and how did that happen?
Well, it was a dark and stormy night. No, it's actually a funny story of how I got into it accidentally. So my first degree is in theater, and not that I'm going to go all the way back that way, but I spent 30 years in the classroom teaching language arts at the 6th grade level. And when you're trying to get 6th graders to enjoy literature and learn to read, or loving to learn to read, boy, I used my theater degree far more often than my education degree. And in the last 5 years of my career, I was lucky enough to leave the regular classroom, and I went to 2 elementary schools in the city that I live, and I was the teaching librarian there. So I just read to kids all day long. And it truly was a first grader who, after I had finished reading a book and I sit back down, I'm sweating a little bit because I act out the books and my voice is a little harsh because I'm doing all the character voices. And he says, "Gee, Mr. Ellis, you should be a professional reader." And I snarked back. I said, "Well, I read to you guys all day long. The school department pays me for that. Therefore, basically, I am." And I was a huge audiobook fan at the time. This is about 7 years ago. And it got me thinking, who are these people that narrate these audiobooks that I love? And I had some equipment. I'm a musician. I figured out how to audition. That first night, I sent out 4 auditions and I won 2 books. And I said, whoa, I'm on to something here. And for audiobook narrators listening, I've never had that luck with a 50% turn since, but it just gave me the message that, geez, this was meant to be. And about 4 years after trying to be a narrator and a husband and a father and a teacher, and my wife left her job to do all the post-production. And then I got jealous of her sending me pictures of her sitting in front of the pellet stove with 2 or 3 cats on her lap as she's editing. And I said, that's it. Teaching is getting in the way. And I retired, and now I do this full time.
That's great. I also came out of a theater background and spent many years reading to children as a part of my ongoing growth and development as a narrator. But a first grader being that trigger, that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, do you do any of the audio engineering yourself, or do you leave that to your wife?
We have a full production team. So I have one dedicated human proofer. We also use Positron. And then I have 3 editors that I keep pretty busy. And then, so no, I don't do much of the post-production anymore because it's, again, for narrators that are thinking about getting into this, if your mouth is not working, you're not moving a project forward. And it's more cost effective to have somebody else working right behind you and you just narrate, say new words.
Yeah, that's great. And just for any listeners who heard you say positron and don't know what that is, positron is an AI system for proofing. It is not the same as having a human editor do it, but it is very useful in the overall process as another checkpoint. And excellent company, very dedicated to the audiobook industry. So we're happy to partner with them as well. What would you say is the thing that you love the most about narrating?
The thing I love absolutely most is when my wife and I both retired, we bought a camper and we tow it with a Jeep. And I know some diehards out there are going to cringe at this, but I outfitted the back seat of the Jeep to be a studio. So we pull that camper across the country and we pull into a campsite. I jump into the back seat. I narrate a couple of chapters. And I love the flexibility. That really is number one. It's a job. It's a full-time job. It's got its headaches. My goodness, it didn't work like that when I was in the classroom. Hey, kids, I'm going to go to Oklahoma for a couple of weeks. You guys be good, right? Yeah. But I can do that with the narration and take it on my way. And I'm one of those narrators that does a distinct voice for every single character. So I've got thousands of voices in this head. I'm never alone. And I love that creativity of just being involved in these conversations. As from being a stage actor, usually you get one character and you know that character inside and out. And the beauty of being an audiobook narrator is that you are all the characters at the same time. And I love when we've got an argument going on where two characters are in totally different mindsets. And then the narrator who's in a third mindset pops in and you've got to keep all that straight and be able to do that on the fly. So I really love that creativity and mental gymnastic course that I've got to go through.
That's great. Fascinating, this whole mobile studio situation that you've got going. I think that's pretty cool. And I think you're right that diehards might highly question that as a, wait a minute, can you get the same room tone no matter where you are? But it sounds like you've done a really good job.
So, so that's a great point. My proofer actually prefers the studio in my Jeep to my home studio that I'm in right now, which is just a spare bedroom in the house that is fully covered with the foam. She likes the sound in the Jeep. I would never start a book at home and then take it on the road.
Right.
So no, I don't mix that way. If I know, so we winter in Florida. So if I know that we're leaving in January, I might start projects as early as November in the Jeep so that when I take them with me, because you're right, you have to start and finish. So then when we come home close to April, in fact, it's a handful of projects that I'm doing for your company right now that I'm still in the Jeep. And we're recording this several months after Easter.
Yeah. So, interesting. Yes, consistency. That consistency of space is important. And you brought up the diversity of characters. I also have that same thing where I love doing the different character voices and have lots in my head, and it's really fun. What are some of the things that maybe are either tips for other narrators or just interesting things about how you keep them all straight when you're doing a book with many characters?
Yeah. So the first thing that I do is I create anchor files. So the first time a character speaks, I record their line and I save it in a folder called Voices. And what my clients love about that is that if a character shows up on page 17 and then 308, they sound the same. If he shows up on page 17 in book 1 and then page 300 of book 4, they sound the same if I'm doing a series. So when I'm doing my script prep, because as I tell the students in my classroom that are learning how to do this and other people that I'm talking to about it, we're not trying to convince anybody that I am a full cast. It says narrated by Scott Ellis. I'm not trying to fool anybody that there are 17 people in the studio with me. The objective is to make sure that my listeners know who is speaking at any given moment. And so one of the things that I do in my due diligence in my script prep is I will note when characters first appear, who they are in conversation with throughout the book, so that if I have two male voices that are similar, they don't show up in conversation with each other. So I will track that. So you have to read everything you're going to narrate. People always ask, can I just turn on my mic and start reading? Not for recording purposes.
Not a good idea.
If you want to,
Very dangerous.
You've got to know where the book is going. You've got to know which characters are going to appear. True story. I had a book that I was narrating that it wasn't until like the last chapter. Someone said, how do you think people always listen to you first? And the character said, well, maybe because it's my Texas drawl.
Yeah.
If I hadn't read that book, I would have had to go back 200 some pages and fix this lead character's voice because I didn't know they had a Texas drawl.
Yeah, this very topic.
Got to take notes.
This very topic came up in a recent interview a couple episodes ago now with Sam Cooper, our casting director, who brought up a story similar to that, where it's like, if you don't know until the very end that someone's got an accent, you could be in big trouble. Yeah.
Yes. And it's at that point, I'm not sure I would want to go and do all of those as outtakes, as overdubs, voiceovers. I think I'd start the book over because it would be so choppy.
Right.
I just, wow, what a nightmare that would be. So do your homework.
Yeah. That brings up the topic of pickups. I think especially for our author listeners, sometimes there will be, let's say if narrator switches the word order, we do that. Sometimes it makes exactly the same sense in the sentence, but maybe the words are, that is in a different spot or something. That these kinds of minor errors are really better left alone unless they change the meaning or there's some really good reason to change it. Talk to us a little bit more about the pickups, and maybe you can describe from your perspective what some of the biggest challenges around pickups are.
Yeah. Pickups are, I've never clocked it, but I think pickups can almost take as much time as narrating the whole darn chapter. I'm one that I get into my acting and I get into my presentation and I'm really thinking about my delivery and I'm not thinking so much about the manuscript. And I know that sounds silly, but that's probably why I end up with the average of one error per 60 seconds of narration that I don't catch. That's horrible. So I have a lot of experience doing voiceovers, but I've always said that it sounds like an oxymoron, but audiobook listeners don't want to be read to. They want to be engaged and told a story. And so I can't read the manuscript to make sure that I say every single word correctly. They've turned me off. In fact, some of your listeners to the podcast probably just turned me off. The obvious answer is you have to catch everything first run. Whether it's you catch it, your proofing level catches it. You should never do your own proofing, by the way. You don't know that you've learned to mispronounce words and things like that. I try and get as much perfect as I can, but sometimes my editor will find it or it gets through to the client. And yes, some of them will say, yeah, it's fine. Leave it alone. It doesn't change. But some say, you know what? These are the words I wrote, and they do deserve to have them narrated that way. Yeah. That truly is our job. Yes, one of the dangers is a choppy voiceover can take the listener out of the experience. And one of the analogies that I use is people usually don't sit back in a recliner and listen to an audiobook the way they might read. They're doing other things. They're driving their car. They're mowing their lawn. They're doing whatever. So there's so much going on in their environment that can take them out of the story that the last thing I want to do is have something in my presentation that takes them out of the story. And they say, wow, that was that just got loud. Right. And now they've been taken out of my moment. And I'm a live musician and I can see when I've lost an audience and I can work differently to get them back on track. But once I click I'm done and people are listening, I have no control. I'm not there to watch. So I'm very particular about not taking them out of the experience. Kind of the way that we do things, and it may be a little backwards, I don't know, but we actually do our engineering before we do our final editing. That way we can catch if for some reason the engineering has missed something. And so by the time my editor goes through it, or particularly the client hears it, which is the final production, I always find it easier to go back into my file that I did my original voiceovers into and drop them in. That way I'm comparing in my ears apples to apples. I'm not hearing the post-production quality. I'm hearing the pre-recording. And then my editor will pull those voiceovers out after they've reprocessed that file and drop them in where they need to be, and then adjust them for normalization up or down to make sure that they're as seamless as they can be. Which, another tip for narrators, save every version. I saved my raw recording. I save my voiceover complete recording. We save our processed file, and then we save our edited file. Yeah, we save each file 4 times, but we can go back as far as we need to be able to get those things to be seamless.
One of the things that people are not really conscious of necessarily is how our voices change from one moment to the next. So from one studio session to the next, they also change. And it's like developing those skills of reconnecting with the voice that you used in that moment is a real talent. And
that's a great point. I usually don't record before 10 in the morning. I'll get up and I'll answer some emails and all that stuff and do some vocal warm-ups. I did try a horrible experiment. I had a character that had a rough voice, and I said, it'd be really interesting to record his lines when I first wake up. And so I tried that, and then I found out that A, you don't sound exactly the same every morning when you wake up. B, trying to put those in post afterwards and drop them. Oh, good golly, it was a horrible experiment. Don't do that.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're going to just take a short pause and we'll come right back and we'll talk some more with Scott Ellis.
Frustrated by the royalty rates for your audiobook? Annoyed that when the digital distributors say 70%, they actually mean 70% of 50% or 80% of 70%, neither of which is an actual 70%. Wishing there was a way to cut out or at least shrink the middleman. Yet, you want your audiobook listeners to have a smooth and positive experience, and a direct download sale from your website won't deliver that. Pro Audio Voices hears you. Out of our commitment to our author clients, we've created Amplify, a program that provides an actual 65% royalties of the price you set, that gives you access to your customers' names and emails so you can reconnect with them, and keeps you in the driver's seat. Check it out at proaudiovoices.com in the marketing menu.
All right, Scott, do you have any particular favorites when it comes to genres or types of stories? Yeah.
I think because one of the things I don't do now that I'm an audiobook narrator is read. I tend to like the style of books that I would enjoy to sit and read. So I feel like that's in my wheelhouse. I know it the best. So I enjoy doing thrillers, suspense. I have a couple of series that I've done in that film noir, when it works well. I have that. I was sitting in my office on a Tuesday. There was a knock at my office door. That kind of stylized. But then I'm not afraid to read scripture and research names of the biblical eras and things like that, particularly through you folks. I get a lot of the religious material and the nonfiction that is breaking down and analyzing biblical passages. So I'm not afraid to do that. I think a lot of narrators might think it's not worth the extra time and effort to become comfortable and understand what you're saying. So I enjoy that because it's what keeps the kids in college and the lights on. But I really love the thriller and suspense. And it's the stuff that I'd like to read if I took time to sit in a chair and read a book.
I find also that as I'm selecting projects that I'm interested in narrating, I also lean towards those ones that are like, well, I would like to I'd like to listen to this. So then I want to do the narration of it. Yeah. Yes.
I tend not to do heavily romantic books because, as you can tell, nobody would want to listen to this voice tell a romantic story. I know my limitations.
I, on the other hand, love romance.
There you go. See, you got it. Oh, gosh.
Is there something that you would, if you had a moment, which I'm about to give you, to share with authors, something that you feel like they should know as they enter into the audiobook world for the first time? What would you like them to know?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, there is an alternative out there, AI, and I don't think they want us reading novels written by AI. They want us to recognize the art form and the creativity and the professionalism that they bring to the craft. I'd love for them to understand that we are in that same boat. And yes, they might be able to get it narrated a little less expensively, but when you take that human touch out, it's always going to lack something. So I think that's first and foremost. Secondly is that it's not just, why is it expensive? Aren't you just going to turn on your mic and read my book? I've mentioned that I do this full time. And when I get a new manuscript, I work almost a full-time week on that manuscript before I even touch the microphone. And then once I am into it, to fully produce 1 hour for them to listen to, can take between 6 to 8 hours for our team to produce. If they've got a 10-hour book, that represents at least 80 hours of working time and then other getting prepared time. So that I would never do it to them where I would just turn on my mic and start on page 1. It would be horrible. So I think that's it. And then when they're thinking about where to offer a price for the production or justifying in their minds why the price is what the price is, breaking it out and saying, okay, they're going to be working this many hours. That comes down to, $7.47 an hour. That's not fair. Yeah. In Massachusetts, that's illegal. And so I think those would be my first two important things.
And you've brought up something that I've been talking about quite a bit on the podcast recently, and you've brought them together into these two beautiful pieces. So I want to pick up on that and run with it a little bit. And that is that the AI version of narrated audiobooks, which I feel it's like, I have this cartoon in my head of this janitor with a mop or a broom, and he's leaning on it and he's talking to someone else. And right next to him, he's standing right next to this AI machine that's pumping out music and art and audiobooks. And he says, it's not so bad. I just have my AI write a book for me and then read it to me, to pass the time. So we become the manual laborers and the AI becomes the creator of sorts. But that aside, that was a total down the rabbit hole thing. Sorry. But AI as an offered solution to the cost of audiobooks is, while I appreciate the fact that people recognize that it is a challenge for authors to come up with the cost of paying for audiobooks, we took a whole different version of the solution to the problem. Problem, as I see it, is not that the cost is high, but that the return has been so low. And that is the fault of the retailers. And I say fault. It's a problem in the industry, and it has been consistently for quite a while. And that is that the authors get too little of the royalty pie and not enough control to actually effectively market their own audiobooks. And that's where with Amplify Audiobooks, which we're making a lot of noise about right now because we're disrupting the industry, we are changing that and turning it on its head so authors have the royalties to make it profitable to be producing audiobooks, even though they are expensive at the front end. That's true. But also the control to be able to do it and the tools to be able to market effectively. It's basically taking those two things that you talked about, AI and the cost of audiobooks, and it's a very different new solution to resolving that for authors. Thank you for bringing those both up.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Didn't know I was serving up a softball, but I'll
teed it right up for me. And then is there anything that if you had one or two things that you would like to make sure that narrators know and maybe these are folks who are new in the audiobook industry or just considering it, they're interested in audiobooks. What might you want to share with them?
Get them to rethink when they hear what I do and they say, oh, I could do that. I like to read books. That's great. That's wonderful. That's certainly part of it. That's probably 197th of it. to recognize that this is not something that it is something that almost everybody could do, but not right out of the gate. You need to get some coaching. You need to get some training. You need to get some recording equipment. You need a dedicated space. You need time to practice. It's not just tonight I'm going to go out and buy a USB microphone and tomorrow I'm going to be an audiobook narrator. To recognize that there is a lot that goes into it. And we've talked about a lot of the process through our conversation today. So I would never tell anybody, no, don't do it. If you think that you're going to start it and quit your full-time job tomorrow, no. I do believe, and I know there's a lot of contention in the narrators groups about there is no minor league. You're either a union narrator or you're not in the industry. I really feel like, no, there is. You have to cut your teeth. Otherwise, you can't tell me Tom Hanks made the same amount of money for his first movie as he did his most recent movie. And if we held him to that standard, none of us would know Tom Hanks because he didn't make that big money on his first movie. One of the most prolific actors in history, I would guess. I'm not a movie watcher, so I'm...
Yeah.
You could prove me wrong easily and I'd take it. But to recognize that it does take practice and it takes diligence and you have to be committed to it. Who is it? I think it's Sean Allen Pratt that when new narrators come to him as a prospective student, he says, go away, sit down for 4 hours every single day and read out loud. And every time you flub a sentence, go back to the period and start reading it again. And every time you come up with a word you don't know, go to the dictionary, look it up, and then read the sentence. And if after you've done that for a week, you still think you want to do this, then come to me for some coaching. Yeah. And I think that is brilliant.
That is really good. Really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah. Finding out that, no, I don't know before you commit to coaching and all of that.
Yeah, very good. And now I'm going to just wrap up with what would you say? Because we've been working together for a while. And what would you say is the best thing from your perspective of working with pro audio voices?
Oh, Carlos and Elias.
Wonderful team.
They are fantastic. Every time I've got an email question, they are right back on it. I do have a classroom where I train people that want to be narrators, and I send them all to you. I say, good, you're ready. This is where you need to go first. And several of them are also on your team, and they also work for my team. It's not proprietary. But I love that. I had a situation where after visiting my daughters, I got sick. And yes, I blame one of them. And I think I was narrating 4 books for you guys at the time and 2 for my personal clients. And I got sick and lost 23 days in the studio. And when you're on a deadline, and I am allergic to missing deadlines. So I kept talking with those 2 guys saying, listen, I'm going to miss the 1 month deadline to get the first third or the second third, but I will not miss the final. And they were so wonderful working with me, keeping tabs on me, touching base. Their communication, you've got some good guys in those 2. So I can't say enough good about them. So I love them. I love the variety of the projects that come through. And I know you've got a couple kind of different levels, and I'm working my way up. I started in your minor leagues and I'm working my way up through, and I've had a couple repeat clients through you that Carlos has sent me a thing saying, congratulations, you've been picked to do the second book. They loved your first one. And it's great. It's great.
Good. So glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, I want to thank you again. This is Scott Ellis, narrator with our team at Pro Audio Voices. We're so glad that you are on our team, and thank you for taking the time to be with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.